My name is Celia Woodruff. I'm a second-year law student at Penn State Law, working with the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For the lab's Witnesses to Her Story project, we are capturing the personal experiences of women before, during, and after periods of momentum during fights for equal rights. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Molly Nemann, who's agreed to share her story as a part of our project. Throughout her life, Molly has been an amazing mother, pioneer, and psychologist, and I'm very excited to speak with you today. Molly, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio.
And who were members of your household when you were growing up?
When I was growing up, there was my mother and my father, and I had two older sisters and an older brother. And then my grandmother's three sisters from Ireland all lived with us. So there were four older ladies in the household besides the nuclear family.
And focusing on those siblings, what was the age difference between you and your siblings?
Okay, my oldest sister, Kathleen, was 10 years older, and Ellen was 7 years older, and Tommy was 4 years older.
And you mentioned that you had a large age gap between you and your siblings. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I was the youngest of four, and then Grandma's three sisters lived with us. So it was kind of a busy and hectic household. I was especially close to my grandmother. I slept in her bed with her because there was a shortage of beds in the household. I was with her until I was 12 years old, and she was extremely kind and loving and very influential for me. Things were good with myself and my sibling. I was the youngest, and I think they found me as kind of delightful and stress reliever, whatever. And that was all positive. They left then. My sibling went on to, my sister joined the convent right out of high school at age 17, and my brother joined the seminary right out of high school, and my other sister went off to college. So I was kind of alone there for, say, through the 60s, say.
Okay. You mentioned that both of your siblings went on, it seems like, a religious path. Was there a lot of religion in your household growing up?
We were all sent to Catholic schools, and it wasn't over the top, but we did go to church every Sunday, and it was definitely an Irish Catholic household for sure.
Now, you mentioned your relationship with your siblings and that they left at one point and you were at home. So did that relationship persist as you got older with your siblings, or did it change significantly?
Well, to start with, I started kindergarten early. I had a December birthday, and so I was a year younger than a lot of the other students in the class. And back then, they let you start early. My sister was a teaching order sister, a Dominican order, and she was stationed at all these various grade schools throughout Illinois and Indiana. And I would many weekends go and spend the weekends with herself at the convent with the nuns. And these were the same order of nuns that I had teaching me at the Catholic grade school. So that was always a very special and bonding experience for me.
Thank you for sharing that. We will talk more about kindergarten. I know you mentioned going to school. First, I just have a couple more questions about the household situation. With siblings who were boys and girls, how were responsibilities divided amongst your siblings when you were growing up?
Well, looking at the overall household, my mother was from Cleveland, Ohio, and in the 30s, she went to Rochester University and had a 4-year degree in dental hygienistry. And my father was a attorney and civil rights attorney and personal injury and criminal. So they were both working, and we really, the older Irish aunts who lived there assumed the responsibilities for the household. And say, for example, one ironed, another one did laundry, grandma did the cooking. I don't remember my father doing anything at all around the house in terms of chores. He would go to the bakery and bring home goodies, something like that. My mother did go to the grocery store. I think we all just chipped in as needed then. I remember we would maybe have a project of painting the upstairs, and everybody would chip in and we'd all be painting. But for the most part, those older ladies really ran the housekeeping of the whole household.
You mentioned the older woman in the household as well as your mother doing a lot of the household chores. Did they also make a lot of the household decisions?
I would say that my mother made the household decisions. She would have been the person who orchestrated everybody all the time, and daddy was kind of more went with the flow of it, and didn't really like any kind of confrontation, so he was easy. And I think, somebody had to be there kind of at orchestrating, and it would have been my mother.
You also described your mother doing stuff outside of the household. Could you talk a little bit about what she did outside the household in terms of career or community involvement?
Yeah, she was primarily a full-time dental hygienist, and as long as I could remember, as from a very young girl, she was working full-time. And she retired, I think, probably at age 65. She had broken her ankle in a parking lot and just kind of had to quit at that point. I don't remember her doing any kind of community service. Her life was busy just with that full-time work and coming home to a busy household. She did have a couple social groups. One was called the Bloomer Girls, and they would just get together and have lunch at each other's homes once a month or so, but I don't remember her doing any community service. What she did do was kind of on the side. Say, for example, she quietly provided scholarship for girls who needed financial assistance going to my high school, and mother would support them, for 4 years of tuition, which was expensive. And she never quite told people, she wanted it anonymous, and that was kind of her spirit of doing good for others.
Mm. You also mentioned that she was a dental hygienist a couple times full time.
Yeah,
Do you recall if there are many other women who are dental hygienists?
I think I don't think there were men as dental hygienists, and I don't know if there are them today. She worked in a doctor's office, but it seemed like it was a real good career. I know she had her own patients, and I would go to her office, and we all seemed to be proud of mother's career.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now that we've talked a little bit about the household situation, let's move forward to when you started school. You mentioned kindergarten. Do you recall what year you started school?
Oh, I'd say, let's see, 1953, say.
Mm-hmm. And how big was your school?
Well, I started just in kindergarten, so it was just a little neighborhood down the street. This was before there was anything like pre-K or anything like that. So I went right into kindergarten, and there was probably only 30 kids or something at the time. And then my grade school was first grade to eighth grade, a Catholic school in the neighborhood also.
When you started school, were you excited for it?
Yeah, I think I did enjoy it, and I did like it. I remember having good friends, and I would take the bus that stopped in front of our house, and there were a lot of neighbors and friends who rode the bus with me. And I remember the lunchroom, and they made us go to church, and that was good, and it was overall positive.
During those early years of school, what did you wear to school typically?
We wore really through grade school and high school, we wore uniforms, which in grade school, they would have been little jumpers, little plaid jumpers with white shirts underneath. And in the winter, we could put black, say navy blue slacks underneath or tights. It was cold in Cleveland, and we had boots and a lot of snow. And then we'd have little navy blue sweaters to put on. So it was very much of a uniform in every sense.
Did the boys and girls have the same uniforms?
Yes, the boys had their navy blue pants and white shirts, and they had to wear a little tie for church. Say, it was very much of a orchestrated, organized way to dress the kids.
Did you like that?
Yeah, and there was some freedom to the uniforms because you didn't have to worry about what to wear. It was just a slam dunk, and you could have a lot of uniforms, so it was easy, and there wasn't any competition about clothes with peers. It was just an easy, no-brainer kind of thing.
Now, during those early years of school, do you recall wanting to be anything when you grew up yet?
I always, well, one thing I wanted to be was a newscaster. Mm. And I remember there was an old lady newscaster named Dorothy Fulltime in Cleveland. And this was the 50s. So I was 6 or 7. And I just remember how cool that seemed to me, that she could be up there and it's all these guys. I was very acutely aware that this woman was doing such a good job, and she was kind of at the helm of the whole thing, and very respected and very loved in the community. And I thought that would be a fun profession, to be in. I think I always wanted to be some kind of mental health worker. Mm-hmm. I always just wanted to help others, and I was attracted to helping people relieve their suffering, if it was going to be social worker or psychologist or counseling. But I was steered in that direction just by my basic nature.
Mm. And that continued throughout middle school and high school as well?
Yes, it did. And in college, I had just a psych major, and I never even considered anything else. I think maybe if I hadn't done this route, I would have done something like human relations, human resources, HR, and which would have been a whole lot of the same kind of work.
And we will talk about, middle school and high school. When you were younger, either in the newscaster, you mentioned seeing a woman on the TV that you really looked up to. Was there any mental health workers or anyone else in your family maybe who had a profession that made you want to pursue a career in mental health?
I can't think of anybody. At this point, I can't think of anybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So moving forward throughout middle school and high school, did you do any extracurriculars?
High school, I was kind of there for more enjoyment than anything. I mean, I studied, my grades were okay, but I think I took that time to be a friend to girls, and it was an all-girls school, and I learned how to bond with girls and to be a good friend. And I avoided the cliques and the groups and the cool girls. And I just I remember being, say, in ski club, and I was in horseback riding club, but for the most part it was more of a social thing. That developmentally it was good. In looking back, maybe some people would have said I should have had studied harder, better grades, whatever, but at that point that has served me well, just learning to be a good friend.
That's great to hear. And you mentioned having a lot of good girlfriends. In high school, what kinds of things would you and your girlfriends talk about?
We talked about was it would look like a very superficial life. We talked about boys, and we talked about oh, we wanted to look good, and we wanted the clothes, and we wanted to get asked to homecoming, and those were the kind of things, those things that look superficial to people maybe, but that's what it was all about. I know through the summers I would work for a camp for disabled kids, and it was an overnight camp, and I would go with some of my friends to that, and that was a good experience. But we were pretty much into the enjoying life and not having anything too heavy or pressing. I know a lot of my friends were working as waitresses, and my parents said they just didn't want me to do that. They said, you're going to be working for the whole rest of your life, and you don't need to do that now. And that was the advice.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that some of your friends were waitresses.
Yes.
Did they ever talk about their jobs with you at all?
Yeah, they felt they were not treated so well, and they would be complaining about customers being snippy and cutting their tips short, and not too nice bosses or managers. It was not generally a good experience for them. They were doing it just to make the money.
So you mentioned some examples about maybe managers being snippy with your girlfriends. Do you remember any specific examples?
Oh, I remember just when my friend Barb would complain because her particular boss was demanding and wanted her to stay longer than hours that she had signed up for. And he was just generally not appreciative of her and a little bit demeaning, and she would come home feeling very badly.
Okay. And pivoting a little bit, we talked about extracurriculars and work. I know you mentioned that you weren't too involved in too much studying. Do you remember what kinds of classes that you were able to take in high school, though?
Yeah, it was a liberal arts college preparatory course, and it would be 4 years of Latin and a couple years of French, and the sciences and English literature and English writing and math and physics and the sciences, just the whole course of liberal arts.
Were there any classes that you know that only boys could take or only girls took, or was it all the same options?
It was all girls school.
Oh, okay. And within that all-girls school, did you have a health class?
We had some biology classes, but these were taught by nuns, so there was not much in terms of preparation for periods or menstruation or anything like that. It was pretty much glossed over by the nuns, I'd say.
Did your family or your friends talk about those types of things with you instead?
Not much, honestly. I remember I was with the Girl Scouts, and I remember we had a day that we went down to the Natural Science Museum in Cleveland, and there was a big model of the human body, female human body, and that was the sex education.
You were in Girl Scouts. Did you like Girl Scouts?
Yeah, very much. It was good. I love that. Brownies, Girl Scouts, yes.
Now, we talked earlier about how you sort of always had an affinity for mental health and working with other people. Did that ever change in high school? Did you ever have any other career ideas before you went to college?
Not really. No, I didn't. It was always that path for sure.
And during high school, I know that there are some big things happening in legislation. For example, the Equal Pay Act was recently passed for equitable wages between different sexes of people. Do you recall discussing any of those developments with your family or friends?
No, I don't, but when I went to a junior college in Yonkers, New York, and that was 1967, that's when things were really talked about. And we were just a 20-minute train ride from Midtown Manhattan. And except for maybe California, everything was happening for women around New York. And that college was had a lot of women's studies program and women. So that's where I kind of got turned on to what was happening in the whole feminism areas.
What is a junior college, just for my own knowledge?
It was a 2-year it was an all-girls school right in Yonkers, and it was 1967, say, still run by nuns, and very, very expensive school. It was these beautiful, big, old, glorious libraries and mansions right on the Hudson River. And soon after that, they kind of had, they were broke. People weren't spending that kind of money on that education. And they tried to merge with Iona College Boys School. And then at this point, they are no more. It's called Elizabeth Seton. But at the time, that's what we all did. We got out of Beaumont School for Girls and went to all-girl Catholic schools.
And you mentioned that at that time there was a lot going on. Were you involved in a lot of the stuff going on, or were your friends?
Yes, very much so. And we were, I did real well at Elizabeth Seton. I had, had kind of the high school. It wasn't all that serious, but at Elizabeth Seton, I was able to be a big fish in a little pond kind of a thing. And I was head of student government and judiciary council, and I was written up in Who's Who in small colleges, and just very active there, and did very well there. And it was a nurturing environment, and liberal, way more liberal than anything in Ohio, say.
Mm-hmm. Now that we've moved forward to college, what were your personal and professional goals looking like when you entered college?
My first husband had gone to Peace Corps in India, and we were separated at the time. And so I was, kind of spending a lot of time missing him. And it was a solid 2-year separation there. But I made the most of it, and I love psychology. I was really kind of formulating that path more and more, and just started to get that direction.
When did you meet your husband?
I met him when I was a senior in high school, and he was a junior at the Jesuit university close by, John Carroll University. And he went to India with the Peace Corps, and then we got engaged right after that. So I was married at age 21, just 21. And I think the average age now is 30, but back then it was about that age. I was right on target, and there was a push to find your husband. And, there were still vestiges of the 1950s, of course, pervasive. And it was, to be looking good and be attractive and get that ring on your finger and not be an old maid. And there was tremendous pressure to do that. After I got married to Paul, I moved to Cincinnati in 1970 because he was a freshman at UC Law School. And I had come from this pretty liberal democratic environment at home and in Cleveland. And I found a National Organization for Women group in 1970. And they were just little gals like me who weren't out to change the world, but we got together, and Maggie Quinn was a civil rights activist attorney at the time, and we got together in her living room, and we would just meet, every Sunday night. It was just this wonderful bonding. And we would go to the high schools and career day, and we would talk to classes and talk to the girls about getting their act together and making their life important. And we got into the University of Cincinnati, and we filed a class action lawsuit because of all the disparate pay and tenure, and how women were just not being given a fair shake at that point, and filed this lawsuit against the university. So all of that was really fulfilling for me, to find like-minded young women.
I'd love to talk more about that. That sounds really fascinating. But you also mentioned earlier how at Seton you were getting really involved in your education. I just have a couple more questions about
Sure.
that. You said that you were studying psychology. Was that your major going into college?
Yes, it was.
And when you said you were really interested in it, were a lot of your friends interested in psychology as well?
Not really. We were all of this kind of find your husband kind of mentality. And most of them were teachers or nurses. And so that not psychology, but more teaching or nursing.
So when you were studying psychology, what did your class makeup look like in terms of boys, girls?
I ended up graduating from Xavier University because I had moved to Cincinnati. And at that point, there were about 7 women in the class out of, say, 200 men. And over a 4-year period, it then changed to over half female. Wow. So it was remarkable. Same thing had happened with my husband in his law school. His first law school class in 1970, 71 was like 4 women. And then by the time they got out, it was over half again. So things really, these miracles were happening in front of us.
Did you notice those miracles at the time?
Oh, the world was just opening up. It was just fabulous. It was so exciting. And it was kind of like over the heels of JFK. He had done so much for women, and the legislation and the Commission on Women, and got that into the States. And the Pope, John the 23rd, he wanted to open up the window and open up the doors. He said, "Agentamento, we got to get with the modern world, and we have to give women rights, and everybody, there's a place for everybody." So it was like transformational and beautiful. And if I had gotten stuck 10 years prior, I would not have been able to take advantage of all the changes.
You said you're at Xavier now. When all these changes were happening, was it well received by university leadership?
Yeah, I think they were on board. The Jesuits are quite a liberal order, and within the Catholic Church, they're less conservative and more liberal. And they kept pace. And then there were women's studies, and there was women's organization on campus. And I remember the football teams. All of a sudden, these girls were playing football on the football teams, and the women's sports, the women's tennis and basketball and volleyball. It was just beautiful to be able to partake in that kind of transformation.
I know you play a lot of tennis now. Did you play tennis in college?
No, I didn't. I started later in life.
Mm-hmm. And were you involved in any other activities around Xavier University?
I was mainly busy studying, and I would get jobs. My husband was in law school, so we needed the money, and I would pick up, say, like a Saturday, doing a doctor's office bills, and then I was working for another doctor's office. So I was more trying to get some money into the household.
How did you two divide responsibilities between what sounds like a very busy time?
I think we chipped in. I don't think it was very rigid. I think he would do the laundry and he would cook and I would too. I think we were enjoying feminism had and hit our household too. And it was good. It was equal.
Speaking of feminism, you talked about this a little bit earlier, but there's a National Organization of Women. There was a lawsuit you had mentioned against the university. Was this while you were at Xavier University?
It was 1970. Yes, it was while I was at Xavier.
Okay. And you mentioned that National Organization of Women. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I was part of this small little group of women in Cincinnati, and at that time, Betty Friedan had written The Feminine Mystique, and the idea that women had been so stuck at home and supposed to, be this helpmate for the working husband and have everything perfect all the time at home. And in fact, they were depressed and they felt very empty and they were isolated and alone. And a couple of those seminal books that came out at that time really started to change people's perceptions and free people up. The whole, say, the talk shows did, and this whole self-help movement did wonders to illuminate the problems that women were having when they didn't have many choices. So this little group of ours started, and then it just took over, and it was turned out to be millions of members across the country, and it grew, and it made a big difference, and it impacted.
That's great to hear. You mentioned talk shows. What kind of talk shows were on at the time?
At the time, it was, say, Phil Donahue. He just passed away, but he was out of Ohio, and he people would be telling their stories, and they would share their struggles, and people started here. This Oprah was in there early, interviewing people and using the studio audience, and it just all of a sudden the secrets that people were keeping, they saw that there were other people too, and they found solutions. And it was a wonderful movement to get people to begin to reach out for help and to get honest and be true to themselves.
What kind of secrets?
Secrets like, say, in the 50s, women were given a whole lot of pills, and they go to the doctor, and they could get pain pills and speed and barbiturates and anti-anxiety medication. And at that time, people didn't think there was much downside to any of that. They found out later there were huge sides, but those kind of problems that kept them inside and ashamed of, and they were true addictions. Somebody like Betty Ford came out and said to the world that she had drug and alcohol problems, and that we have a Betty Ford Center in Naples, 10 miles from here. And Ann Richards was another. She was a governor from Texas, and she also came out and shared her story in an effort to help other people. So it was that finally, letting the light come in, and all that shame and secrecy and sorrow, they were able to let go and reach out and ask for some help.
Was it all well received?
No, I think when you get real traditional communities, there's still a resistance to share difficulties and share problems. And I think it all depends on kind of where you're from, and do you have a lot of enablers around that are going to keep the secrets for you, and or are you going to reach out and get healthy and be surrounded by healthy people? But it's slow. It was a slow process of healing.
Speaking of that, you also mentioned that there was a lawsuit at one point that you were involved in for tenure at the university. Was that
Yes.
related to your work with the National Organization of Women?
Yeah, that was our project. And besides going to the high schools, and we'd have these marches anytime there'd be a parade or anything, we'd band together and march. But yes, that was a big project that we got together and started digging into the numbers at the university and seeing this, that women were just not paid as much, and they weren't tenured as quickly, and they suffered there. They weren't rewarded for their good work.
How did that make you feel?
I loved doing a big thing that was going to make a difference and impact a huge university. I was excited to be part of that. The change.
Was it successful?
Yeah, it was successful. And I think then you look at all this wonderful litigation that followed that, and it was these heroes and these people who were willing to do that footwork and acknowledge the difficulties and risk maybe their own status and positions just to affect that change.
Thank you for sharing all of that about college. And at this point, when did you graduate from Xavier University, and what was your degree in?
I got a bachelor's in psychology in liberal arts, and then I went on to get a master's in rehabilitation counseling at the University of Cincinnati right after that.
When you were pursuing that master's, was it the same thing where there was a lot going on, or was the balance to men and women still around the same in your class?
I would say it was starting to change. I think that the professors tended to be male, but it seemed to me the composite of the classes were pretty equal.
Did you enjoy your master's degree?
Yeah, I did. I ended up working in neuropsychology and behavioral medicine and medical psychology and health psychology. So this master's was exactly that. I was able to get into physical medicine and rehabilitation units and work with people with chronic illness. So it was a good interface of the further graduate study.
I remember you mentioned earlier back at Seton that a lot of your girlfriends were looking at teaching and education.
Yes.
Did you have girlfriends once in your master's program that were studying psychology as well?
Yes. Yeah. They were since they were in a master's program, they were certainly a more serious group of students for sure, and had a career path. Plus just that time and all those pivotal changes that were happening over those couple of years. So it was definitely girls and women who wanted to pursue a worthwhile career and make a difference in the world.
That's great. Was your family supportive and excited about your master's also?
Yeah, they were. I think as a kid, my parents were extremely liberal Democrats, and they wanted to see me happy, but they also didn't want me to pick anything that I could be in a subservient role to men. And I remember my father saying, like, you really don't want to be a bedpan handler, meaning a nurse. And at that time, nurses didn't have the status they have today. That has all changed. All these different career paths have just remarkably changed in terms of autonomy and reward and prestige and all of that. And then they were kind of like, you're not going to be that happy being a kindergarten teacher. So they were kind of steering me to do something where I could have more autonomy for sure.
Did they do that with your other siblings?
Yeah, there was always that. But I remember when a couple times when I didn't want to keep going to school, they didn't pressure me either. it was more of a kind of live and let live philosophy, like maybe college isn't for everybody. It was highly regarded in my family education. My sister had a PhD, my brother had a master's, so it was of value for sure. But I remember noting, gosh, that's nice of them. They're not putting pressure on me to finish.
Was it the same for your friends as well? The advice that your dad gave you?
Oh no, I think the push at that time in the 60s was to be a teacher and be a nurse. Like here in this retirement place that I live, they're all ex-retired teachers and all retired nurses from this era, of mine. But the idea was that you can get married, you can have kids, then you can work part-time, you can have your summers off if you teach. It was all built around that future role in the family, having kids.
What year did you graduate with your master's?
It was 1974.
Mhm. And when did you start pursuing your PhD?
Uh, well, I worked for about 6 years or so, and then I pursued the doctoral program in 1981.
Let's talk about that work once you graduated. What job did you get?
I went to I'm trying to remember if I had my son was born in 76, so I was adopting him over that period of time. But I went to I noticed in the paper there was an ad for part-time work in the cortical functions lab at the Veterans Administration Hospital. So I signed up for that, and it was basically psychometrician administering tests, and it was a 15-hour work week. And Tommy was born in 76, so it was right around that era. And so I worked under a psychology supervisor, and we were at grand rounds at a local hospital. And this Dr. Mayfield, who ran this Mayfield Institute, a neurosurgeon, stopped Bob and said, "Would you like to come and join us at Mayfield Clinic and leave the Veterans Administration system?" And this happened to be a highly prestigious group, medical surgical group. So Bob interviewed and applied, and then he asked Dr. Mayfield, "Can I bring Molly Nemann with me?" And I was the psychology assistant. So I went through a couple days of shadowing Dr. Mayfield. He wanted to see what I was all about. And I spent 2 days with him and his patients. And then I was hired on there.
Did you have to go through interview processes for either of those positions?
It was just more that shadowing with Dr. Mayfield at that time. And it was about 1975 or 6 or so. And at the time, they were all white men at Mayfield, and they were white surgeons and white neurologists and white male, middle-aged, and the rest of the strata was all female secretaries and nurses. So I came in with a master's, and they didn't know quite where to put me. And it was unusual. They just, I was this breed of cat. They had no clue what she's all about. And there was a prejudice against mental health, psychiatry, psychology at the time, and still is, where they feel like it's not a science. And some of these neurosurgeons would have rather put some money into, say, a CAT scan, because that was the up and coming thing at that time, all the imaging that was happening. And Dr. Mayfield ran the show, and he said, "No, we're having psychology come in to take care of our poor suffering patients." And he wanted us to do the counseling with these people. We ran a chronic pain management clinic within Mayfield, and it was a wonderful opportunity, but there was a lot of prejudice as I came in there as a young female master's level therapist.
Could you describe some examples of that prejudice?
For example, when I was working on my dissertation at Mayfield, I had started my program, my school program, and I was doing it on psychological preparation for stressful medical surgical procedures. And so I would be doing these pre-tests and post-tests on people. And I had to work with a neurologist that he was willing to let me see his patients and include his patients in my study. And there was a lot of sexual, I don't know what the word is exactly, but inappropriate sexual response advances to me. And at that time, there was really no support for anything like this. And he was always flirting and all of these beautiful blue eyes and just coming on. He had been kind of a playboy reputation, and it was so uncomfortable. And I would just almost get nauseated at this. But then I felt like I was stuck because I had this dissertation I was involved with his patients, and halfway through I got to get this thing done. So I was putting up with it. And I remember I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because I was embarrassed about this thing. And I remember I went to the chair of my dissertation committee, and I did talk to him about it, and he was very empathetic. I remember him just feeling it was just, oh, I'm so sorry you got to go through that kind of thing. But I sucked it up, and it was very, very uncomfortable. And that was the era back then, especially with these white male docs who thought they could get away. And a lot of the girls were, kind of chasing after him too. It was not a healthy environment.
When you had that conversation, I think you said it was your supervisor or your dissertation supervisor.
Yes.
Did they give you any advice?
He didn't say go report. I hope today, if that was happening to me, I hope I would pick up my marbles and tell him goodbye and go find another place to study. And I didn't then. And my dissertation supervisor was empathetic, very empathetic, but he didn't have any advice other than just hearing me out on the thing.
Were there a lot of other men who were within your PhD group that he was advising as well, or was it men and women?
He was advising a mix of men and women, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And you said you didn't want to talk about how they were treating you when you were working on your dissertation. Did you share that with anybody in your life?
No, because I felt embarrassed, and I was so undone by the whole thing. And I'd be like, gosh, am I doing something? Am I flirting with him and not knowing it? No, is he picking up something? And, this kind of shame when you're not doing anything wrong, but you're feeling like you're doing something wrong. And I didn't want people to judge me in this situation. It was very hard, very hard.
Did he ever stop, or did you end up leaving the job?
I ended up finishing up my dissertation under, using his patients. And I ended up finishing the dissertation and graduating and getting the degree I needed to get. So I kind of just toughed it out there. He never changed, but that was, I would handle it so differently today if a similar thing was happening to me, I hope.
During that time, you said that there were a few different examples. Were there any other examples besides that of barriers you might have faced or things that happened during your dissertation period?
There were still those doctors who assume you go fix some coffee. Those subtle, prejudicial kinds of things. And they were old traditional guys who just expected to be taken care of by women. And I remember just kind of bristling about it. But then I'd like, don't make a big deal, just fix this coffee, bring us coffee in. Just, it was a whole era. And I was in the most of a very conservative Cincinnati, Ohio, which is white, male, German, Catholic. And then to be in this group of neurology neurosurgeons with no other female physicians, no master's people other than me, and no African American or any other ethnic backgrounds. It was as white as they come. It's very different today. It's huge. And they've got chiropractors, and they've got massage therapists, and they got yoga, and they have, they had to get with the times.
Mm-hmm. And then again, during that time, a little bit before, actually, you were talking about all your community involvements with like the women organization. Were you still involved with that during your dissertation at all?
No, I wasn't, because we had adopted Tommy, and he was, 5 and 6. And then we adopted Erica. I got her just about a month after I started my doctoral program. So I was busy with children and studying and internships and practicums and, just so much many requirements.
Let's talk about that a little bit. You did mention Tommy earlier. When you first adopted Tommy, how did you come to that decision?
We were, first off, I was a person who just loved babies and adored little babies, and I still do. And I always wanted to have 4 kids, and Paul wanted to have kids, and I took birth control for 6 months and then stopped with the hope of getting pregnant, and nothing happened. And then Paul had they were putting me through infertility workup, assuming that it's the woman's problem. And I'm taking my temperature and doing all this ovulation testing. And then I read an article in Good Housekeeping about how easy it is to test for a man. And it wasn't even suggested or brought up back then. It was assumed it was a woman's problem. So I got hooked up with a urologist, and then we found out he had a complete 100% infertility of the whole vas deferens. All the tubing never formed, so he had 0 sperm count. So his best friend went to school, medical school, with an OBGYN, and the OBGYN had a patient who was Tommy's biological mother. So we did a private adoption with him in 1976.
Were you working at the time, or what was going on during your life during that time?
I was working for Mayfield Clinic, and working part-time and taking care of him, and just a very busy life.
I know that you adopted Tommy in 1976. So conjoining work and adopting Tommy, was there maternity leave at the time?
No, not at all. Never heard of it.
I was gonna say, I know the Pregnancy Discrimination Act and the FMLA hadn't been passed yet. Were your workers accommodating of the adoption? Your employers?
No. I was on my own. I had to figure all that out. Absolutely. There was no support or empathy or financial support for that. It wasn't happening.
How did it work?
Well, I always had part-time jobs going on. And at that time, Paul was out of law school. He was working with legal aid. So we had some income and kept a frugal life. There were some neighborhood daycares that I could drop Tom off with pay hourly. So it was not easy, but I covered it.
And when you adopted Tommy, I know me personally, my mom had some issues when she adopted us. Was adoption talked about back then?
Yeah, it was talked about for sure. Yeah. What do you mean?
Was adoption popular, I suppose?
Oh,
Were other people adopting kids?
Nobody that I knew, because I was in this very traditional Cincinnati lifestyle. So everybody was having babies basically, and pregnant, and little kids, and pregnant again. And nobody that I knew adopted anybody. I know at the time of Paul's infertility, my mother-in-law wanted us to pursue all kinds of, it would have been in vitro, not called that back then, but they were doing some very experimental early infertility treatments. And I remember her pressing me and wanting me to pursue these medical things. And she wasn't pressing her son, she was pressing me to pursue. And I remember just saying to her, it's so early and they really don't know outcomes, and I'm just not comfortable doing it. And she just wanted me to just proceed in that direction, and I was uncomfortable. It was in the 90s that all that IVF and frozen zygotes and all that, and I did have a friend who benefited from that and did get pregnant through that. But for the most part, people were biologically having their children.
How did that make you feel at the time when your mother-in-law was talking with you?
Oh, I felt just terrible, like I was screwing up or something. And I knew in my heart of hearts, I did not want to be pursuing these highly experimental early treatment interventions. And I couldn't convince her how I was feeling. And she, I think, thought I was very selfish. I remember when my husband had his exploratory surgery, he was coming out of the anesthesia and he was yelling, I'm a freak. And at that time, there was no support for infertility. And now there's a ton of support groups and individual and all kinds of really good things for people. But I was so alone. We were so alone. I'm sure the marriage took a hit because of these emotions that we just couldn't process. And I remember feeling so jealous of these pregnant friends. And it was a sad time because I was so geared up to babies. And there was no support in the society for me. And today it's different.
When Tommy came along though, how did you and your family feel?
Oh my God, he was just beautiful. Oh, he was just, and still is to today. We were just so thrilled and so excited. And I would say, I maybe didn't go through birth and delivery, but this was the most exciting moment when they put that little guy in my arms. And oh, he was dark haired, dark eyed, dark skin. And we thought he was born November 24th. And we thought they said at first, like, we'll see you, like, say Saturday or Monday even. But the biological mother wanted to get out of the hospital. So we got a call on this Friday morning. He was 45 hours old. And they said, meet you at the doctor's office. And I just remember, I said, oh my God, I'm shaking. And they said, you got this whole building shaking. And he was in this long hospital gown. And it was just one of the best memories of my life.
How did those first few years go raising Tommy?
Oh, he was just delightful. And Paul and I just loved him. Any damage that we had from all that sadness and grief around infertility was just filled up for us. And he was a kind of a quiet, shy, smart, loving little baby. And it was just exactly what we needed to have our family complete.
Did people at work ask about your adoption of Tommy?
Oh yeah, and I would bring them in, and no, they knew him well, and it was very accepting, and it was really a positive thing.
Now, I know that you discussed this after Tommy, you also adopted Erica, your daughter.
Yes.
How did that go?
Well, we knew we wanted to have a second one, and we went to Catholic Charities in Cincinnati, and we went through all the hoops of group stuff, individual, medical evaluations, psychological evaluations, group, individual, just assessing us as to be, are we fit parents or not? And we were kind of on the list, and it was all moving forward. And I got a call from the social worker, and I was working part-time at Mayfield Clinic at the time. And she was one of these old-time social workers who'd been around a long time. And she called, and I'm at work, and she said, how do you think you're ever going to have a second child if you're working and you can't even stay home with your first one? And she cut us off the list that moment. We were terminated with their services because of me working. And so I went and pursued another agency, this children's home in Cincinnati. And it was, we were fortunate to link up with a progressive social worker, and she moved us on right through. And that's where we adopted Erica from.
Do you think that social worker was typical of other social workers at that time?
I would think Catholic Charities in Cincinnati is typically traditional. And she was a lady maybe in her 60s who'd been around forever and ever, and not a feminist in any way, and she had rigid ideas and concepts of roles of women at home, obviously. And hopefully that's all changed. And I'm sure you're still going to run into them in such a conservative community, but hopefully it's the minority now.
You mentioned at that time you're still at the Mayfield Clinic, and then you were
Yes.
also with your two kids. Was anything else going on in your life at the time?
Oh, just that I was going to get ready to start the doctoral program.
Mhm.
And, it was just more that pace of taking care of the kids and getting the coverage, getting the daycare coverage, and doing the work at Mayfield Clinic, and taking care of the marriage, and, just pretty much pulled in a lot of directions. But I was young and I had a lot of energy, and it's what I wanted to do. We had a big, gorgeous, beautiful Tudor style home. It was about 100 years old, so there was a lot of house stuff involved. I had a housekeeper named Aureen that came in. At times it was full-time, and then my mother would come in from Cleveland, and if I had some work or school demands, she would come in and give me a week or two and take care of things.
And when we did talk a bit about your dissertation, when your dissertation wrapped up, how did you feel about what you just accomplished with finishing a PhD?
Oh, I was so relieved. It took me longer because of these, two children. But at times I wanted to quit, and I thought, well, I'm married to this lawyer and he's going to make good bucks, and I'd rather just kick back. And it was interesting that he was the one that pushed me. He got, come on, you're so close. Don't give up yet. And my sister, who just died and who was 10 years older, she also was there telling me, don't quit now. You'll never be sorry. And a big impetus for me even getting that independent license to practice was the fact that I was working under that supervising neuropsychologist. So I'd be doing all this work and make these beautiful reports, and then he would undersign me. And then he would make more money than me. And it would just get to me because he was getting all the credit for my work. And that was the impetus for me to get a license to practice independently.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so relieved. I was so happy. And we had to do another year of supervised work, internship, postdoctoral, 1 year pre, 1 year post. So then it was another before I was able to sit for the licensing exam. When
you were working under the person who would undersign all of your work, were there other people who were in a similar position as you who would do all the work and he would undersign it and get all the credit for it?
No, because it was just he and me working, this within this whole group of docs and then secretaries. So it was only Bob and I doing the psychology service of this Mayfield Institute. But he would maybe not even see the patient, and I would be seeing the patient all the way through for neuropsych evals and therapy, and then he'd get the final. And he'd be paid more. I was master's level psychometrician or psychology assistant.
Now, after you finished your PhD, did you continue working with Bob?
Yes, I did. I continued at Mayfield Clinic until 1999. And Paul died in 1990. So I was, that decade of the 90s, I was widowed with 2 young children.
And how did you manage that? What was going on in your life at the time?
He was 44 years old when he died, and he was a strapping, strong, young, healthy person. And he was coaching the kids' softball leagues, and he drove them every single morning to school. He was involved dad all the way, and a good person. And all of a sudden he developed some fevers at night, and it turned out he had a kidney cancer. And he was was diagnosed in March of 90, and he died in May of 90. So we just had 2 months, and they sent us by the time they discovered it, it was in his hip and his lung and his kidney and bones and all over the place. So they shipped us off to National Institute of Health in Maryland for some experimental treatment. Nobody in Cincinnati could do anything. It was too far advanced. So we left for 6 weeks, and he had a surgery there, and my mother and my sister moved into my household and took care of my kids at the time that we were gone. But then he died in May, and I was just reeling. The kids were 9 and 13 at the time. And at the time I got Erica in a lot of support groups. There was a center called Fernside in the neighborhood, and she was going to camps for grieving kids. And Tommy never wanted to talk about it. He just shut it down and shut it out. And he was 13 at the time, and I wasn't going to force him to get help, but he never talked to anybody about it. He was closed. But I continued to work part-time at Mayfield through the 90s. And I remember he died in the same hospital that I was working in, this Christ Hospital. And I was up on the 5th floor with him. And the nurses all knew me, and they kind of tucked me in with him. I stayed with him for a couple weeks there. And then, so it was ready for me to get back to work. And I said, there's no way I can do counseling. I'm too raw and it's too fresh, and I'll do some neuropsychological evaluations on patients, but I cannot do the counseling piece. And the first referral I got was a guy dying of cancer, and they were requesting a family intervention. And I'm like, I told everybody I'm not doing this, but there it was. And I thought, okay. So I remember walking into the hospital room, and the patient was going on to hospice, and there were 3 adult kids and a wife. And I said, my husband just died, and you might have to pass the box of Kleenex to me, but here I am. And I had to dive in, so it was okay. And then I saw that I was going to be okay, and I continued that work. And I did a lot of death and dying and hospice work and family work and the letting go process and all of that. And it was all okay. I was to have that license to practice, though. I was so happy that I wasn't having to find another psychologist to undersign my work. And if I talk to people today, like you say, or anybody, and I say, don't go for that short game, go for the long game, because it pays off, and be that independent practitioner, and don't count on a man to get you through here.
Were you being paid equally at that time once you got your license?
No, I wasn't. And the Bob Tureen, who I was working with, he was kind of a hippie type, and we both were in this fantastic medical surgical group, and we almost didn't have the self-confidence and self-esteem to ask for what we needed pay-wise. And I remember my husband, we were on a 3-way phone conversation, and he was trying to press us to go ask for more money. And he was somebody who, with his law firm in Cincinnati, he got them all moving and shaking and into nice facilities and charging what they should be charging. And he was sitting on some committee, ethics committee, about legal fees and what's equitable, what's fair. So he was a business mind, and he was pressing us to go ask what you're entitled to. And we never did. And it was the self-esteem and the self-regard problems that we almost felt like we didn't deserve to be there. So, if I had gone and asked, they might have said, go. It was like that privilege of being there. And all of my contemporary psychologists, they just couldn't believe I had this cool job within this medical. And they were, schlepping with their offices and sharing with other psychologists. And I had this kind of lofty impression, a lofty impression or something. And I just got on in there on the coattails of Bob Tureen. It wasn't me, but Mayfield liked me when he put me through those couple days. And then they liked my work once I was in there, but they didn't want to pay. And we didn't ask. And
Did you ever broach the subject?
No, never. I just took whatever they were willing to give me. And it was just not healthy. It's not a healthy. I hope if today, what I know and who I am today, I hope it'd all be different. And I'd leave. And I wish there'd be transparency of salary and equitable things. And they didn't know what to do with this master's level. What is this? Who is this? They knew how to pay secretaries. They had that scale. But I put up with that.
When you were in that loftier position that other people and women saw you in, did you mentor anyone at the time or take on any leadership roles?
Yeah. Once I had my license, I supervised some people who needed X amount of supervised hours, and I was hooked up with the hospital, so I would be taking them around with me, and they could shadow me. And I was going to nursing homes, and I was teaching the residents neuropsychology, and I was consulting with staff. I was part of rehab teams, OT, PT, speech, and yes, I had several supervisees who were trying to finish up their license to practice.
And during that time, we had mentioned that your husband passed away, but you had your license now and you were practicing. Did your family stay around to continue helping watching your kids during that time?
No, because my mother died, and got old and sick and died, so she was not available, and I was pretty much on my own. I did have this lady named Oreen who came in, and she was like a member of the family. I had financial resources to pay her, and she facilitated the household running at times that I had to be gone.
What did your day-to-day look like?
It was hectic with two years after Paul died. You mean, so they were in school, they were 9 and 13, but then I had to worry about after school, and I had to worry about summers. And then I wanted them in sports and doing extracurricular things and have as much of a normal life as they could. So it was a lot of dropping kids off, picking them up, trying to get the dinner together, worrying about my patients, and getting a call from the hospital. You got to get in here, emergency kind of stuff. And so it was, plus I was a 40-year-old widow. And socially, I'm in this conservative situation. So I'm the only widow. I'm 40. And we had a lot of couple friends. So these couple friends are trying to ask me to join them. So I'd be number 3 or number 5, 7. And I felt so odd and so out of it and so sad that I missed my husband. And so I just had to stop that social life because it hurt too much. And then I didn't have much of a social life because I was so busy raising these children on my own that it was kind of empty in a way. It was an empty time.
And during that time, how did that make you feel?
I felt like I was the odd person looking in, or the square peg in a round hole. And I had been connected up with National Organization for Women when I got to Cincinnati, 70. But then I moved into this conservative social group. And these women, we had like tennis club and stock club, and we all had kids in the same school. And they were all ultra right conservative, all of them. And they stayed home. I was the only person who worked. And even after their children left for college, they were still staying home. And so I never shared with them my liberal progressive leanings. I never told them how I felt about anything. I never opened my mouth because I didn't want to get into confrontation. And when I left there in 2014, I told them, and they were shocked. They just assumed that I was like-minded like them. So I came to Florida, and I'm in this same ultra-conservative environment again. And I zip my lip, but it's not being true to me. But I happen to be in this Southwest Florida conservative. I was out with my 2 best friends this morning for breakfast, and they were both talking about the illegal immigrants and how they're all taking spaces in the schools and taking our seats, and our is white. They mean our white seats. And I just sat there, and I just can get churn on my stomach, but I'm not going to take them on. Mm-hmm. So you said, how do I make you feel? I have almost had this my whole life in Cincinnati for 30 years, not being able to speak up. And it's not a healthy place.
So thank you for sharing all of that. Now that we're in Florida, I would like to back up just a little bit, and we will talk about that, absolutely. So when around did you retire?
I retired, I left Mayfield in 1999, and Erica, my daughter, had severe mental health substance abuse problems, and she had a new baby, Alicia, my granddaughter, and Erica was on the streets and trashed and in a horrible situation, and many suicide attempts, and horrible people, and in jail and in and out of institutions. And at that point, I said, I'm going to give a year to taking care of Alicia. She was a newborn, and Erica was gone. So I quit Mayfield and took care of Alicia at my home as a new baby. And then I decided I needed to kind of get back to work. So I started my own private practice at that point. And I started to share Alicia with her biological dad. So we were able to, and then the other grandparents, they also pitched in too. So for the next couple of years, I had Alicia at my house with some help from the dad's family. And I had her like at the nursery school and at the preschool, and I'd be at Christ Hospital with the team meeting, and I'd be like, oh my God, the bus is coming at 2:30 and I have to run out of that hospital, and all these young therapists, they'd be laughing, this old grandma's running after the school bus. But I did that for a couple of years, but I also was working back at the hospital. And then I opened up a little private practice in my condo. So I was able to see people. And this was the beauty of my independent license to practice, that I could kind of do anything I wanted to do and do it my way. And at that point, I had been around for so long that people trusted me for the referrals, even though I took a whole year off. When I popped up again, I got busy again.
Before you retired and started your private practice, did you have the same position you had when you first got your license and started practicing?
Yes. Did you say it again?
Yep. So just to repeat my question.
Okay.
When you retired, the position you had when you retired, was that the same position you had when you first started practicing as a psychologist?
Yes, when I retired in 1999 from Mayfield.
Yes.
I was able to function as a licensed psychologist after I got my licensure in 90. So for those years, he was not undersigning my report, and I had better reimbursement of my services just because I got that license.
And once you were in private practice, after you took that brief period to take care of Alicia, did you make any changes when you were managing your own lifestyle, based on your experiences in private, working at the hospital?
Yes, I did. I was feeling like all I'm kind of doing is just giving and working and not having any kind of personal life and social life. And so I decided to buy a condominium in Florida in 2005. And with that, I would work for 3 weeks and see people in my little home office or Christ Hospital. And then I would come to Florida for a week. And I would do that for a long time. And that week here kept my sanity. And they put up with that at home because I had been around for so long. So as soon as I was back, they'd be scheduling to come in. So that worked really, really well. And it saved me. It gave me a lease on life. And little Alicia, every single June, she would come with her Nana to Florida here. And every single year, every age, school would be out, and she and I would come to Florida. And it was just beautiful. And she has not missed a June. And now she brings my great grandson, her little 3-year-old, with her to come here. And that's the beauty of it. My son Tom and his family, they come every single June too. Erica will be here in February. So they love coming, which makes it nice.
That's wonderful. And you continued private practice. Could you remind me what year you retired?
In 2014, I retired. I relocated from Cincinnati to Florida. I got married, built a house here, and all within 2 months. And these were all things I wanted to have happen in my life, but I didn't think that it was time. I didn't think that I was going to be able to quite pull off all that, but it all came together. So it was exactly 10 years ago.
When you fully retired, what else was going on in your life at that time?
Well, I came right here. I got married in January, and I came here and built the house. I wanted to work with Latino population. so when I moved here, I got trained to be a tutor and teach English as a second language. And I was working in a moms and tots program. While the moms were in class, I was taking care of the little kids, which I just loved. I just loved it. And I didn't have Spanish, but they said, speak English to them. Don't even try to speak Spanish. And I didn't want to talk to anybody anymore. I had done so much talk therapy for my life. And all I wanted to do was hold these babies and rock these babies and feed these babies and play with the babies. So that's what I did.
And now that you're retired and in Florida, were you doing anything else besides, tutoring those kids?
Right now I'm involved with a family, and Ellie is 40 years old and she's here from Mexico, and she has 3 boys, and she calls me her white mom. And I see her a lot, and I'm going to go to the kids' baseball game tonight, and I collect donations and every week, and then I take them to her, and then she kind of dispenses things according to need. So I've been busy with that. There's a place called Cafe of Life. It's a wonderful agency in downtown Bonita, and I cook over there. We serve hot meals every single day, and I helped several women prepare for their citizenship exam, their U.S. citizenship exam. So that took a lot of time, and they passed. So that was all good stuff. I'm kind of a jock here in Florida. I had never been a jock, and we never had any team sports. I'm 75 years old and no team sports, and I'm on some leagues here. And the women who I play with might be 60 or 50, and they've all been on teams, and they know how to be good sports, and they know how to throw it off, and they know how to help each other and be competitive in a good way. And we older people never learn that, because all we had was a little bit of gym, and we're out there on these tennis courts, and we can't take losing, and we can't take being picked over somebody else, or the whole experience of being on teams, we have not had it. And we can be just act in a ridiculous way out there, the little egos. But I'm kind of a jock here. I mean, I do tennis leagues, and I do rowing, and I do yoga, and I do biking, and I do swimming. And my husband gets up maybe at 11 in the morning. So in the morning I'm up early, and I get all that done. And it's good for my osteoporosis and arthritis. It's my way of taking care of me. Mm-hmm. And I don't have medical problems other than those. And it's because of this lifestyle I have. And it's a gift. It's a gift granted that I have that time.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned just earlier, playing tennis with your friends and the team mentality. You were talking earlier about the conversations that you have with your friends, even earlier this morning.
Yes.
How do those conversations usually go when it comes to politics or social things?
It's always an ultra conservative, far, far, far as right as you can get. And I don't know why this area of the world, this region, and when I was going to move to Florida, I was going to go to the east side of Florida because of the Democrats. Mm-hmm. And Broward County is one of the highest population of Democrats across the U.S. And I was from Cuyahoga County outside of Cleveland, where their campaign for Obama was like model. They had buses going to nursing homes, getting people signed up to vote, and they have been held in high esteem for the operation that they ran for Obama. So I was all ready to go to the East Coast of Florida for that reason, to be around like-minded people. And then my sister was here, and I felt like I should move close to her. So that's why I ended up here. But my intentions were to go where people feel like I feel. for once in my life, adult life.
That leads into my next question. Throughout your whole life, have you felt that you had different social or political views than maybe some of your peers?
Yeah, as a child in my household, my parents were extremely liberal, and it was equality for all, an opportunity for all. And I remember going to the jails with my father to bail out people, and I'd go into the hospitals and sign up on personal injury, and he was always doing major pro bono work, and taught us that you just have to be open and not be full of hate with people, and you have to develop patience and tolerance, and we are a country of immigrants. We're all immigrants, and there's room for everybody. And any gifts that you've been given, you be generous with those and you give back. And that was what I was taught in my home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was a mixed bag through high school, and we didn't really talk much about politics. We were so worried about, where is the next mixer? And then certainly New York was liberal. That was a liberal. Then certainly my early involvement with now in Cincinnati was, but then after that, where I decided I was just not going to share how I feel, and I was outnumbered, and that's so for those adult years, I didn't have the support. It's not good to keep things inside. The way I feel about politics is so built in, so programmed in. It's like me having a being left-handed or blue-eyed. It's just part of my soul. And to have to kind of sell out a little bit by keeping quiet and let people assume that you feel like they do, like I did this morning, that takes its toll, because I want to live a really honest life.
When you were in Florida with your sister, though, did you guys talk about politics at all, or did you find any support there?
She kind of bailed on us and married a arch conservative Republican. And, my other sister and I'd be like, oh my God, Mother and Daddy be rolling over in their graves if they ever saw Ellen, Republican. Wait a minute. But that's what she signed on for. So I couldn't get into it with her. I could not discuss anything with her. And it was sad. It was a sad situation, but she kind of bailed out and to go with the husband. And she was certainly a product of those 50s. She was 82 years old now, she died, but she was a product of those 50s.
Now that we've covered so much of your story, I know that we started this interview with me describing you as a mother, pioneer, and psychologist. How would you describe yourself if we went back to the beginning of the interview?
Current? Today?
Yes, looking back.
Today, though, how I am today?
Well, I described you as just like 3 key words to describe your life and your story. I guess, how would you do the same for yourself?
Okay, for over the years.
Yes.
I would describe myself as a psychologist who made a lot of good contribution to the field. And I'm proud of my work. And I was there for people. And I was there for women who needed to find their voice. I would get referred, many referrals from neurologists, neurosurgeons, where there was nothing physical found in their workups, but then they assumed that there's some emotional stuff. And often those people were so depressed and despondent and passive, those women, and I helped them find a voice and reach down deep and find out what they needed. And I worked with a lot of geriatric medicine the last 10 years or so, and I helped those older women who were product of those 40s and 50s passivity, and patriarchal system, and I helped them try to figure out what they wanted for the rest of their life and what their needs were, and they weren't used to. They were codependent, and so that was a good impact. The other thing is that I did well raising my children, and I was single in a couple's world, and I had a especially difficult problem daughter that was for decades. She was just so sick and so ill, but I hung in there. I never gave up on her, and I was a good mother to them, and I'm a good grandmother today, and I'm a good great grandmother today, even though I moved away and nobody was there in Cincinnati at the time. I moved away, but I have stayed in close contact with family. And the other thing, at this hour of my life, I haven't worked for 10 years, but I had my two sisters and my brother die within the last 3 years. And I was able, because of this gift of retirement and time, I was able to be with them for the last couple of weeks of their life. And I was able, with hospice, I was able to sit the vigil and be with them bedside. And it was a gift to me and a gift to them. It was a tremendous amount of comfort. And at age 75, this is kind of how life starts to pan out. You start losing people. People get sick and people go, and it's all in that letting go. But I had that gift of time with my 3 siblings. So those are I think the roles that I would describe myself. The other interesting thing is that right now I almost sometimes live like a 50s housewife, in that I have a very traditional household, and I do the cooking and the grocery shopping and change the sheets, and it's a very traditional. My husband is sick with heart failure, and he can do very little, and he's not remembering so well, so I need to remember for him. And it's interesting, that whole element of choice, that I have no resentments in this world over my days today, because I love him dearly. He's 11 years older, and I chose to sign on with him. And anybody looking at me, it looks like I'm in a time warp or something, but it's a choice, and it fits, and I want to be there for him, and it works.
How does it make you feel, though? You mentioned other people might see it as a time warp.
Yeah. That I don't care, because I'm making choices here, and love will find a way. And at this point, I could care less what people are thinking about me. And I know that, like my sibling, like my kids, that I have been present and accounted for. And I am today in this marriage, however long we have together. I'm all in, and I do run around in the morning with my exercise. But I said to him, the minute you need me staying with you, I'll be here. If you need me here, I will be here, and I will. And I'm a pretty much of a committed and faithful person by nature. And that gives him solace and peace of mind. He has a dread fear of going to any kind of facility. And I assure him he won't. He'll be home with me. So.
And you mentioned earlier, just to touch on something when you were describing yourself in sort of 3 segments, working with a lot of female patients who were referred to you when you had your own clients or patients. You said that a lot of them were a little maybe despondent. What types of afflictions, or how do you think you were able to help them, I guess, out of those situations?
Yeah. Sometimes I was also working, say, with a lot of Parkinson's patients and MS patients and chronic illness. And sometimes it was just being there as a witness to
Mhm.
their pain, and being there without advice and without judgment. These people usually have a ton of people in their world saying, why don't you try this? And you're so lazy, and you got to get up, and you got to do this. And why don't you? And to just have a non-judgmental person there to witness what their experiences sometimes can be the first time they've had that kind of thing. And it helps to find where are those toxic areas of your life, and you don't need to keep leaning into toxicity. And where is the strength, and to work on those kind of spiritual resources, that soul work, that inner strength and courage and ability to surrender to those things that you can't control. Usually that would be most helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. And I do have another question. Just looking back on all you've experienced and achieved, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
I think I would say that I never gave up, and I just kept on going. And the tragedy of the infertility was a traumatic setback, especially since there was nobody in my society who supported or understood or empathized. And I got through that, and I could have turned off to adoption. I'm not doing kids. And I didn't. I had an open heart to that. And they fulfilled me. They both have just fulfilled my life. So thank goodness I was able to not shut down. And then when my husband died when I was 40, I could have shut down at that point too. And I could have said, I'm never working again at Christ Hospital, and I'm going to go sell houses or something. I got to get away from people and away from the sadness and tragedies and trauma and losses. And I didn't. I just followed my heart, and I knew that I would have more to offer by coming out alive through that experience. And I could help others because I could truly empathize and have walked in their shoes. And so it's that kind of tenacity or stamina, and I have belief that whatever happens in my future here, it'll all be okay. I have a deep spiritual life, and I do believe that there's a God of my understanding kind of taking care of me, and I have faith and I have hope that I'll be okay. So it's that kind of that inside job, or that inner workings that have got me through some real trauma, and all the better for them and out on the other side.
Thank you very much, Molly. Now that we're at the close of our interview, and as we close off, I just wanted to thank you very much for sharing your story with our audience. It was an honor hearing everything that you had to say, and I'm excited for the impact your story is going to have on our project. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.